I grew up in San Diego. I'm from a musical family. My family's all classically trained. As a result, when I was a little kid, my parents started me on piano and drums. I'm sorry, not drums, piano and violin. Then when I got to be probably 6 years old, my parents finally broke down and bought me a snare drum. Once they did that and they saw I started sort of manifesting all these things in my head on the snare drum, and then I started mixing the ride cymbal and the snare drum together, and then the next year after that they bought me a hi-hat cymbal. Pretty soon after a few years of having both of those things, they just broke down and rented me a drum set. They didn't want to buy me one just to be safe, so they rented me one, and from that point on it was done, and I just kept playing with records, and that's all I did all the time. When my brother, who was studying violin like I was, and had taken to it a little more than me, started playing drums just for the fun of it, and he started playing in a rock band. And then I started like kind of gradually interacting in the band with these other guys, and occasionally I'd sit in with him when my brother would let me, but that was kind of rare. I basically had stayed tight with one of the guys in the band who had joined a band in San Diego locally that was playing proms and opening for all these bands at the time and doing all this stuff. And they had a single on the radio. They were pretty popular, and they needed a drummer. So I think I was 15. I remember I couldn't drive, but they were all in their 20s. This guy recommended me to the gig, and I went in and auditioned for them and got the gig. So I started playing all these local gigs, and I'd been doing some pit stuff in San Diego, pit orchestra, some symphonic stuff in San Diego too. So after that, I started playing with these guys all the time, which I did until I graduated high school. I played all my proms and did all that stuff. After that, I basically ended up going to PIT in LA. Once I got there and the whole world opened up with, all the educational stuff that I hadn't been exposed to other than records at that time, I got really into Weckl at that time, and he was just kind of coming on the scene at that time, and Dennis was too, actually. As soon as I heard Dave, I started like, oh man, this is what I want to sound like, blah, 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 and I started listening to everything he was on. One of the artists he was playing with was a guy named Michel Camilo, so I started listening to Michel Camilo's first record at that time had just come out. So when that was done, when music school was finished, I basically decided to go back to San Diego and practice my ass off for the next couple of years just to see what would happen. During that 2 years of practicing, I started trying to correspond with Dave. This was before the days of email. So I would send him, letters, whatever, asking him stupid questions, and he always responded, and he was always really nice and supportive, and which I appreciate to this day. Basically, I sent him a tape at one point, long story short. He heard the tape and said, that sounds good, and whatever. Then he was doing a clinic in San Diego at some point, and I saw he was doing a clinic, so I thought, well, I'll go down to the clinic and go to the sound check and see if I can maybe sit in or test his drums for him just so he can hear me play. I think he probably knew what I was trying to do, and he handed me the sticks, and I went up and played, and he didn't say much, and we hung out that night, and whatever, it was a done deal. So a couple weeks later, I'm still living in my parents' house. I'm probably 19 or 20 years old. And my mom comes in and wakes me up and says, Dave Weckl's on the phone. So I answered the phone, and Dave said, I just recommended you to Michel Camilo. And I said, what do I do? And he said, well, he'll call you, and his management will call you, and you'll figure out what the deal is. And so then, long story short, I ended up getting on a plane coming here to New York, about 4 blocks over from here, and auditioning, and I was told I was on trial, but I had the gig, and from that point on, I kept playing. So once I started doing Michel's thing, a course, the whole world started opening up. I immediately went from playing casuals and little club days in San Diego to being on tour in Europe and looking on the side of the stage and seeing Dave and Dennis and these guys all standing there. You know, I was a little young to deal with it, and it was a lot of pressure. I started doing that. I toured with him and did maybe 2-3 records with him until I was maybe 25 or 26. And when I was 26 or 27 years old, I got a call to do Manhattan Transfer's gig. So I gradually started phasing out of Michel's thing a little bit, and I think that's when Horacio Hernandez started doing it. During the later years of Michel, there had been a number of bass players doing it, and right towards the end of the time I was doing it, Anthony Jackson had started doing it again. And I met him, and which is one of my all-time heroes, every drummer's all-time hero. Anthony recommended me to a Japanese pianist named Akiko Yano, and she was a former member of the Yellow Magic Orchestra. We started doing a tour every year and a record usually for about 10 years, actually until just a few years ago. And you know, we'd go out once a year for a month, and I get to play with Anthony. And so between transferring that and Michel and whatever record dates or film things or commercials or any other work came in, I was usually not in one place very long. So by the time I got to be maybe 32, 33, and I kind of took a step back for about a year or so and hung out in San Diego and tried to figure out, because I had started relatively young and I'd been doing a lot of work, and the road thing was I was burning out a little bit, so I just kind of chilled and did local gigs for fun. And then in 2004, I moved back to New York.